Now, today's topic is the ongoing and evolving crisis in Syria. This slow-motion horror show, or a train wreck, pick your metaphor, has been underway for 18 very long months now, with the United States and much of the rest of the world largely watching from the sidelines. I think it's fair to say that the situation has only gone from bad to worse. A year ago, we were told that foreign intervention to rapidly collapse the Assad regime would only pour fuel on the fire, increasing the risks of civil war, sectarianism, loose WMD, and the fracturing of the Syrian state. Well, the world did nothing. We left the playing field to the Iranians, to the Russians, and in his own way to Kofi Annan. And now all those risks have rapidly come to pass, a self-fulfilling prophecy if ever there was one. Except now we face a situation where it's not just 1,000 people dead, but by some counts as many as 25,000 people, with more massacres occurring on a daily basis, and it seems at a quicker and quicker pace. Sectarian hatreds and the thirst for revenge have deepened. Warlordism is on the rise. Islamic radicals of every stripe have gained at least some space and influence on the battlefield. And the proposition, the very proposition that Syria will survive as a unitary nation state as we've known it, is increasingly being thrown into some question by the actions and designs of the Assad regime, to be sure, but also by the appearance in recent months of a liberated Kurdish region along the Turkish border in Syria's northeast. Now, at this point, things have deteriorated sufficiently that, from my perspective at least, whether Assad stays or goes, it's hard to envision how we are going to avoid at least some period of sustained chaos, bloodshed, and instability, with perhaps the only question being what, if anything, might still be done to contain and circumscribe the damage that will be done, and whether the Humpty Dumpty that is modern Syria can ever be more or less put back together again, and if so, how? Of course, the damage that will be done will extend not only to the Syrian people themselves, horrible as that will be, but to Syria's wider neighborhood. It's obvious from reading the headlines that the longer this crisis continues to spiral out of control, the more risks it is posing to the stability, security, and well-being of key American friends and allies in Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and even Israel, with potential consequences, blowback, and conflict scenarios that are far-reaching and highly unpredictable. Indeed, one of my objectives today in this session is precisely to try and tease out what may be some of the broader strategic implications arising out of the unfolding crisis in Syria, and how that situation is being viewed and dealt with by some of the key regional actors. If in fact, as I believe, which I stand ready to be challenged on, that we could be witnessing nothing less momentous than the possible unraveling of the Levant's post-World War I political geography, what does that mean for Syria, for the Middle East, and for the United States? Now, having put my my own despair and pessimism very clearly on the table, I hope that in the course of the discussion, my colleagues today will set me straight by pointing out whatever silver linings and potential opportunities I may have missed in the current situation. I'm only too happy always to hear why things are not really quite as bad as I seem to think they are. A few words about our panelists, very distinguished group. First, let me introduce and say it's a very special pleasure to welcome an old friend of mine, Dr. Fuad Hussein, longtime Chief of Staff to His Excellency Masoud Barzani, the President of Iraq's Kurdistan Regional Government, and a key player in formulating the KRG's policy toward Syria. Dr. Fuad, it is really a great honor to be able to host you here at FDD, and we very much appreciate your willingness to be here and to share your enormous experience and ideas with us. Also, we have Ilhan Tanir, the Washington correspondent for the daily Vatan, which I'm told is one of Turkey's most widely distributed newspapers. Ilhan has made several trips to Syria this year, and we're very eager to hear his insights. Soner Cagaptay is another old friend. director of the Turkish research program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and without question one of the most authoritative voices we have on Turkish foreign policy. And finally, we'll also be able to hear from my colleague Tony Badran, who's a fellow here at FDD and whose analytical work on the Syrian crisis week in and week out that appears in the online pages of the journal Now Lebanon are truly unmatched, I think, in terms of the kind of consistency of depth and insight that they offer. Now, given the number of panelists we have and the shortness of our time, we're going to try and forego opening statements and instead jump right into a discussion. I'm going to start by posing questions to the panel, maybe for about 45 minutes, an hour. We'll see how it goes, and then we'll open it up to all of you until we close the program at around 5:30. So let me start by asking each of you to give me a short assessment of where exactly you think we are right now in this struggle as we sit here today. Broadly speaking, who's winning? Do we believe the fall of the Assad regime is inevitable? And if so, how's it most likely to happen? And how long does anybody believe it will take? Ilhan, you have a unique perspective of having been to Syria 3 times, I think, in 2012, in Damascus, Aleppo, and Idlib. So you've seen the fight from the ground, and I wonder if we can have you kick us off.
Thank you. Thank you, FTD, first of all, for having me, and thank you, John, and thank you, Tony, for having me here. And it's a great pleasure to share this panel with Tanir and Dr. Hussein. And so, yes, I've been in Syria 3 times this year. In 2012, in the beginning, January, end of January, I was there for 2 weeks and in Damascus. At the time, actually, I stayed 2 weeks. I'm going to go, very fast. Basically, it was the ghettos of Damascus, suburbs of Damascus, and even the end of January, actually, those suburbs, I am talking about 10 minutes to 15 minutes distance to the center of Damascus, were under the FSA controls. So you can imagine, even then, FSA actually showed their power. But then, as the Arab mission left, regime forces came back and took over all these suburbs, and then they started their total assault to starting from Hama and Homs and all the other destruction. This time, though, in Idlib and in Aleppo, there were no regime forces. There were large swaths of land in the north of Aleppo and Idlib as well. They were under FSA control. And for example, Binish is about 10 kilometers to the center of Idlib. Last time the regime forces in Binish, it was last November. But that doesn't mean that these places are under the full freedom or under full control, because first of all, this time you constantly you witness regime fighter jets over you, that not necessarily bombing you, but you can watch, and then the Syrians' new tradition is to guess which town that fighter jet is bombing, or helicopters. Next time you go and visit these places. In Aleppo as well, in Salat neighborhood, for example, you go and you see the total destruction, a house that 5-10 people just got killed that morning or still inside, and then you can decide that whether regime forces are targeting FSA elements or just randomly whatever comes to their shells. Nevertheless, for example, in Binish and Aleppo, at this time you see hundreds of thousands of FSA members. All those places under the FSA control, and the members that I met in Damascus and in Idlib and Aleppo, all of them were locals, the ones that I met. And as far as I could see, they were popular among the people. And who's winning? I do believe that it is opposition that is winning right now, but that doesn't mean it's decisive or it's going to be, this fight is going to end very soon. As long as the regime have this advanced or relatively advanced artillery and obviously the air force, I just don't see how the FSA are going to able to fight with this force. I mean, you basically, for example, you sit with the FSA leaders in Jabal Zawiya, which is a mountainous area around Idlib, and all those places are under the rebel controls, and you sit and you are going to start interview. At that moment, it's, you hear fighter jets are coming in, and again, the bomb somewhere, and these people are watching. I mean, there is nothing they can do, basically. So, this kind of a desperate situation, and I don't think you have to guess, but whenever you ask what do you need, I want to say this and then finish it, which I ask, I believe, every single FSA commanders and locals and everybody I talk to almost. What they say is, we don't need pity, we don't need foreign troops. All we need is no-fly zone, and all we need is missile manpad that they can hunt these jets or helicopters.
Tony, what about you? What's the state of the fight?
I think what I think what Ilhan described is pretty much sort of the consensus view at this point, that the question now becomes less about a collapse of the regime as sort of a territorial contraction of the regime. So you have very much in the countryside of Idlib and around Aleppo, and even within the city of Aleppo itself, it becomes almost sort of, to draw an analogy from Beirut, from the civil war, it becomes a divided city, right? So you have certain neighborhoods that are under the control of the FSA and others under the control still of the regime. And now this new phenomenon that the regime has introduced, which is sort of these local, they call them popular committees, which is sort of essentially little more than communal militias manned by minority groups. So in the various quarters of these cities that are mixed, you will, in Damascus, for instance, but also in Aleppo, you will see them. In Aleppo, they're using Christians and Armenians, for instance, that are arming themselves to keep out the FSA from coming. Now, whether this is voluntary or involuntary, whether out of loyalty to the regime or not, is irrelevant, because it may be just out of fear that if the FSA comes in, the regime is going to bombard the quarter, and therefore they're going to lose their livelihoods. So the idea, however, is that this becomes a good way for the regime to create a stalemate. A stalemate that definitely does not reinstate its own control over the territory of all of Syria, which now by now I think is a foregone conclusion. But it does keep it in the game, and especially if it amasses all these minorities around it. He may still think he could win, and he's getting all the support from the Iranians and the Russians in order to do so. But the likelihood is, if he forces a protracted stalemate down the road, then I can see it, what sort of similar to Lebanon as well, where people start calling for the analogous Syrian variant of the Lebanese Taif Accords, for instance, whereby everybody wants to have a reconciliation to reunify a fragmented Syria and so on and so forth. And then he will present himself as an indispensable interlocutor in the midst. So that if there is no outside shift that will shift this balance of power, this stalemate on the ground, this could very well be. I mean, and we're hearing today, there was a news report, or yesterday, from Al Ra'i newspaper that, citing diplomatic sources in London, that they've tracked movement of chemical agents from the surrounds of Damascus to the Tartus area. So if he is indeed contracting and falling back on secure and loyal territory, with the sort of this insurance card of his chemical agents and air power superiority and artillery, which which the rebels don't have any answer to. They have an answer to the tanks, increasingly to the helicopters, but not so much for the artillery, which makes him able to conduct this kind of static warfare where nobody can enter anybody else's enclave, which means that his chances of staying in a contracted territory increase.
Tanir, how's it viewed from Turkey, do you think? Do they see this situation as a protracted stalemate? Can they endure that?
A good question, because I don't think I will make too many comments on the situation in Syria, as I'm not a Syria expert, but I'll more look at the Turkey-Syria border and how the situation is impacting Turkey and how it is therefore likely to shape Turkey's policy. Just to build on comments by Ilhan and Tony, I think while we could look at the situation and say the regime is contracting, the situation is, so who's taken over if the regime is not disappearing but contracting over Syrian territory? And it's not, I think, it's too early to say that, as far as I can see, this is a liberated area in the sense that Benghazi was, a contiguous large piece of territory from which the regime is entirely absent. But if you look at the Turkish-Syrian border, I think you see a very interesting phenomena. It is the emergence of what I call, and I should get copyright for that, what I call ink blots on the Turkish-Syrian border, in the sense that there's already a number of refugees in Turkey, about 180,000 refugees officially, probably another 30, 40, maybe 50,000 who have crossed on legal visas. So about 150,000 Syrians now in Turkish territory, according to estimates by Turkish officials. Many of them are in camps right on the border, and it's where those camps are, that across from those camps on the Syrian side of the border, you are seeing the emergence of these so-called ink blots, an area where there are refugees who are waiting to cross because Turkey is only able to process so many, to whom Turkey is providing relief on the Syrian side, or Turkish and European NGOs are providing relief on the Syrian side, from an area from which the Syrian regime is absent, and an area that's usually controlled by some anti-regime element, FSA or Kurdish National Party. So you're seeing these are obviously small areas. That's why I call them ink blots, and it's as if they are bleeding from Turkey into Syrian territory. They're not contiguous. We can't really talk about a strip of territory liberated, but it's 2 miles here, 5 miles there. And these, I'm doing a study on this, and I think these ink blots are appearing where border crossings are at the moment, especially in the vicinity of the westernmost border crossings, 2 in Hatay province and 1 in Kilis, where a lot of the refugees have already been settled. So right across, and it helps that if one side of the border crossing on a Turkish side, there's already an ethnic Arab community. It helps that will sustain the ethnic Arab community. On the other side, linguistic and cultural and family ties helping. So Turkey's position on this is evolving fast because on the one hand, I think the Turks don't want to end up with 1 million refugees. That becomes only their problem. And everybody else says, well, you took them, now you take care of them. That will be similar to what they faced in 1990s when about 500,000 Iraqi Kurds took refuge and Turkey was left alone, at least in the initial months, to cater to the needs of this large group. So I think Turkey is trying to prevent that, but part of that is also that with more anti-regime elements able to establish some kind of authority, and with the regime contracting from the Syrian side, these ink blots might grow in size and in number in the coming days, which is really a de facto way of saying these safe havens are forming. I think they'll form very gradually. It's a question of whether the regime will move back into them. They might, come and try to take them over with their superior air power. In which case, the question of whether or not you provide the FSA and others with anti-air power missiles becomes significant. But at the moment, I think this is the trend. You are seeing probably as many refugees or those who are fleeing persecution on the Syrian side of the border probably as there are inside Turkey. And usually these two areas are now kind of forming these ink blots that are kind of moving inside to Syrian territory and growing in size. So my prediction is that in the coming months you're going to see Turkish policy increasingly saying, you know, what do we do with these people on the other side of the border? You know, there's so many of them, and especially if the regime decides to move across. And obviously that brings a whole bunch of other questions into mind, because one way of looking at the ink blots is this is great, you know, safe havens are forming inside Syria, and this is how it all starts, because once you have liberated areas, then the international community is under obligation to protect these civilians, and then it just goes, you know, the Libya model or what else follows. But there's another way of looking at this is these ink blots also mean that the Turkish-Syrian border is merging into the terrain. It's not really disappearing, but it's kind of merging into the terrain in the sense that the border is not significant in certain places, because on both sides, Turkey is providing relief to camps of refugees, and there's no Syrian government on the other side. So that could mean, you know, it could work in the interest of the Syrians, but also that, you know, who's going to be using or taking advantage of the merging of the border into the terrain. And this, I think, in Ankara, this will be the biggest threat, will be especially recent terror attacks by the PKK, and whether this group will take advantage of the new situation on the border, the more porous nature of the border to come back into Turkey, especially since we have seen a heightened PKK campaign against Turkey in the last few months. A number of significant attacks, including a massive terror attack in Gaziantep, not a city where you would traditionally witness violence related to PKK, and I think this has really scared people in Ankara. That's the right word to use. One more question for later on. I think this brings us to how the future of U.S.-Turkish cooperation looks on Syria, obviously, with the Turkish view on Syria becoming not yet one of emergency, but that, let's say, one that's near emergency, that somebody has to do something on this, because otherwise it's becoming too unmanageable, even on the Syrian side of the border. Yeah.
Dr. Fuad, let's move to you, because I think you probably have a very unique perspective, and I think if there is an opportunity in this whole situation, it may in fact be greatest for Syria's Kurds. But I wonder if you can just lend your perspective from where you sit on what's happening in Syria and what the dangers and opportunities may be.
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be here. It is a difficult question, of course, to answer what is going to happen in Syria. There are various scenarios, and one can deal with these scenarios and talk about these scenarios. There is one scenario which says that, or which gives signals that perhaps this fight or conflict will continue for a long time. So some people are comparing it with the civil war or internal war in Lebanon, which continued for 15 years. The other scenario is that the situation will continue, but the regime, Assad's regime, will control some areas in Syria, and they will withdraw from others. In other words, they will focus on the big cities, and they will leave the periphery to others, because they cannot defend all areas. Anyhow, we see various areas, different areas, which gradually comes under control of either Syrian Free Army, or in the case of Kurdish movement, under control of Kurdish political parties. It is obvious the regime became weaker and the opposition is stronger, but which kind of opposition? We have got various opposition groups. Inside we have got Free Syrian Army, but Free Syrian Army is not united, and it doesn't have a structure. It doesn't have a clear leadership. This is a problem for the political groups inside Syria, but it is also a problem for many countries who are dealing with the opposition, supporting the opposition. We have got also opposition abroad. Syrian National Council and they are trying to mobilize people inside. But still, even within Syrian National Council, we have got differences and sometimes conflicts. Having said that, I think the situation in general in Syria is heading towards, I mean, the regime will be weaker and the opposition, general speaking, will be stronger. But that doesn't mean there will be, within a short time, a change in the regime in Syria. I mean, the possibility is there that the regime can defend itself. It is about the army, and the army, the majority of the army officers are still loyal to the regime. And of course, the regime is trying to give different picture about opposition, that it is a sectarian fight, and when they are talking about sectarian fight, that means the Alawid must defend themselves. And actually also the regime is addressing other minorities, especially the Christian and Durzis, and sometimes they were trying to address the Kurds, creating a kind of atmosphere that it is not only the regime will be defeated, but also these minorities will be defeated because the other side, they belong to a different sect. Of course, talking about the opposition, especially the way of, I'm talking about armed struggle, there are some groups, perhaps they belong to Syrian Free Army, or they don't belong, but in reality they have to do with some terrorist groups, and I think this is in the benefit of the regime, because the regime can also announce that the opposition includes also some terrorist group. I mean, all these factors, internal factors, regional factors, and international factors, must be included if somebody is dealing with Syria. The problem with Syria is now we have got many players in the field. In the past, when it started, it was opposition and the Syrian regime. In the past, when it started 18 months ago, it was a peaceful movement, and then you have got the regime. But nowadays, you have got many internal factors, many regional factors, and many international factors. And that will make it difficult for various countries, but for individuals who are observing the Syrian situation, to reach a conclusion about Syria. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Ilhan, let me just ask you to drill down a bit on this question of what do you understand about the opposition that you saw, particularly in the north in Idlib and Aleppo? What can we say about who they are, about the divisions that exist, secular and Islamist, rural and urban, of course Kurdish and Arab as well? What's your impression of how unified or completely fractured the opposition is, and the FSA in particular?
There are different parts of this answer. I mean, I don't think I can easily say it's very fractured, or I can easily say it's rural. But I'll try to answer in a couple parts. One of them that, for example, in Damascus, a few 7 months ago, the FSA local leaders that I visited at their home, while their wives were preparing teas and their kids were playing at the same time, there were Kalashnikovs in their rooms, and a few people are coming later on, and then it's becoming crowded. So these are the local FSA leaders that I personally met, and Aleppo as well. I stayed with the FSA. People there, once Syria, people don't move a lot. If someone is from Hama and stays there forever. So in Aleppo or Idlib or Damascus, it is how it is. in Idlib as well. But I mean, we do know now there are foreign fighters there as well. If you have to guess, I don't think it's more than 1%. I haven't seen neither in Idlib or Aleppo or other places. I've heard, and now there are some credible reports that some foreign fighters, but it is again, I mean, very catchy news, part of the news that there are foreign fighters, but at the same time the bigger picture is that mostly at least 10 towns or 10 villages in Idlib, or a few towns in Aleppo or Damascus, those are the people in majority either defected or from the area that basically armed themselves, whatever they find fun, and they arm themselves. In January, when I asked FSA leaders that if they are Salafis or they're Al-Qaeda elements, they usually laughed at me in the first seconds, and I just don't think they were acting. I mean, if they were acting, or just they were political correct, they must go to Hollywood and make a movie, because I think it was an instant, and I've seen it. And then this happened a few times, and then they told me, well, 1 or 2% we can say that Salafis in Idlib. This time I again asked the same question both in Aleppo and Idlib, and this time the numbers were about 5% of Salafis, for example. I don't think it's more than 5%, but now I do believe that about 5%. What does it mean? Well, apparent logic is if the FSA that we know more moderate or secular ones, which usually they are. For example, I was in Aleppo in Ramadan, and most of the FSA, maybe all of them, were not fasting. And not only not fasting, but they were eating, publicly, which is, very interesting to see in front of everyone. I mean, there are a lot of just regular Joes, regular, Syrians who just come up and joined, or, some street gangs as well. It is not, all of them, perfect. I do not believe that. But yes, there are now very small amount of foreign jihadists that I have not seen. I've seen Salafists, but the problem is if the moderate ones are not getting help, I don't know, if this thing is going to get worse or better. In Idlib, I'm going to say this and end it. In Binish, I met a young guy. There was a youth organization. They had about 300 members. They were fighting. I mean, it was supposed to be media center in Binish, but they didn't have internet. Nobody had internet in Idlib. All they were doing is to publish, black and white magazine with 20 pages and distribute that every few weeks. That's all they could do. And what that young guy told me, that they were increasingly under the pressure of the Islamists around the Idlib, that they are coming and they are pressing them to join them. One, they have better equipment, they have better arms now, they get money, and they are becoming, slowly but surely, they are becoming more stronger. And recently, as far as I can see, now they are putting some pressure on the moderate side of the Syrian opposition, which basically they try to coordinate the protests and mudaharas. And again, if the help drags on, I think it's just going to be, we are just going to see more these new phenomena that we haven't seen before.
Dr. Fuad, I wonder if we can follow up with you on the Syrian angle of the Syrian opposition. If you can just describe, because President Barzani and yourself have played a vital role with the Syrian opposition, trying to unify it. It appears now to have gained some control of territory, or at least certain parts of the Syrian opposition. There are splits. I wonder if you can describe those, what's happened in terms of the KRG's role, and what's your understanding of the goals of the Syrian Kurdish opposition?
John, if you don't mind, I will. Sure. I would like to give some comments about what Mr. Tanir said. I think he's right. Ilhan is right, mentioning that the percentage of the, let's say, extremists, Al-Qaeda or Salafists, this percentage is not so high. But the problem is they are well organized, they are disciplined, they've got leadership, they have got ideology, and they have got support, money and weapon. And they just started now. I mean, when 18th month ago, they were not so strong, but gradually they are winning the ground. And it is not about only the jihadists who are coming from other countries, including jihadists who were in Iraq and now they are going to Syria, but it is also about Syrian people who were, or originally perhaps, they were moderate and gradually they will be affected by this new ideology. We have the same experience in Iraq in 2003, 2004, when some groups started fighting the American and the political process in Iraq. The group of jihadists or Al-Qaeda, they were small, they were foreigners. We didn't have Iraqi Qaeda, but after a while we got Iraqi Qaeda, so they will affect the population there. So that's why they are dangerous, although they are, I mean, their percentage is not so high, and Ilhan is right, but the problem is, if this fight will continue, if the conflict will continue, that means the fighters, they need more weapon, money, and also ideology. It is not enough to have money and weapon, but you need also an ideology so that you can continue the fight, and they have got that. That's why it is, to be honest, we must follow the situation as far as the Salafists, and to follow them, and there are many countries also they are supporting them. As far as the Kurdish opposition, when the uprising started 18th month ago, the Kurdish political party, there were many Kurdish political parties, and they were divided, and they were not coordinating with each other. They were not united, and they didn't have a clear vision and clear strategy. After various meetings of the Kurdish leaders from Syria, and the meetings happened in Erbil, I think gradually they developed a strategy. The first steps was to mobilize the Kurdish people there in Kurdish area. And the second step is to have a clear vision about how are you going to be part of this opposition. The strategy of Kurdish political parties in the beginning was to be part of the peaceful movement against the regime, but not to be part of the violence against the regime. And in the beginning, although there were many people who were criticizing Kurdish strategy there, I think they didn't raise the slogan of down with the regime. They didn't want to see the regime directly as an enemy. They were more raising the slogan democracy for Syria, but not down with the regime, but they were raising democracy for in Syria. They were raising the slogan, or the slogan of having the right of the Kurds, cultural rights, political rights. And their strategy, I think, gradually has developed from a strategy of being part of the opposition, peaceful opposition, to a strategy being against the regime and working together with other opposition, I mean Syrian opposition. As far as the unity among the Kurds, the first step was to get about 11 Kurdish political parties together so that they can form a front. And at the end, they established Kurdish National Council, just comparing to Syrian National Council. So they established Kurdish National Council. But outside Kurdish National Council, we got the political phenomena of PYD. That's an organization which has sympathy with PKK. So one can say the Kurdish movement was divided in two wings. One wing which included almost all Kurdish political parties, and the other wing which has to do with PYD. Many people, they were believing that PYD had a relationship with the Syrian regime. I don't know about that. Perhaps elements of some leaders, some people in the organization, they had got contact with Syrian regime. But at the end, both, I mean, PYD and Kurdish National Council, they came together once again in Erbil, and they reached an agreement. That is recently, it was in July. So they reached an agreement to work together and to form a joint leadership and to establish a new structure in Kurdish area. And new structure has to do with dealing with daily life of the Kurds, because gradually Kurdish areas is under control of the Kurds. Although in various cities you have still got the military camps near the cities or security they are around, but in general Kurdish areas gradually is coming under the control of the Kurds. So you need to deal with daily life. You need to deal with education, you need to deal with healthcare, you need to deal with municipality, all these things. So they are organizing themselves, but at the same time they consider themselves as part of the opposition. Now, for example, when both sides, I mean both wings, they reached that agreement, they gave a statement, and for the first time they raised the slogan "Down with the regime." And their contacts with Kurdish Syrian National Council, I mean Syrian opposition, is also good. They are in negotiation with them, so that perhaps they will reach an agreement. I don't know, but it depends on Syrian National Council how they will recognize the rights of the Kurds. So it is a kind. I mean, there is a continuous dialogue between Kurdish movement in Syria and Syrian National Council, and Syrian National Council leaders have been in Erbil, and there was discussion with Kurdish leaders in Kurdistan, in Iraqi Kurdistan, but also between Kurdish leaders in Syria and Syrian National Council, and the meetings happened in Erbil. So we are trying to advise them to be part of the Kurdish leadership in Iraqi Kurdistan, advising the Kurds in Syria to be part of the opposition and to fight for their right, but peacefully, and they must not use violence, but also to have dialogue, continuous dialogue with Syrian National Council, so that they can reach joint program.
Just to follow up, there have been reports that, and I think President Barzani even said that Iraqi Kurdistan had been training Syrian fighters to go into Syria at some point and help maintain security. I wonder if that's true and what the thinking is behind that. And second, that does seem to put Iraqi Kurdistan's policies or foreign policy at some odds, perhaps, with Baghdad's foreign policy. Baghdad has pursued a different path with respect to the Syrian crisis. I wonder if you can talk about that dynamic as well.
First, with Baghdad, we have got differences on many fields, so it is not only that. Unfortunately. As far as training, that's true. President Barzani mentioned that in one of his interviews. We were thinking from the beginning. We were dealing with various scenarios which I mentioned in Syria. If the Syrian government will stay, how are we going to behave? If Syrian government will be toppled and there will be change, how the Kurds are going to develop their strategy. But in all scenarios, we reached the conclusion that at the end, the Kurds can take care of their areas and their population. Okay, so when you are talking about daily life, when you are talking, and we went back to our own experience in 1991 and 2003. In 1991, when Iraqi Kurds controlled the areas with the help of the United States and Turkey and other allies, and there was no fly zone, so at once those people who were in the resistance, they were fighters, they were political leaders, they became responsible for daily life of the people. So how are you going to deal with the population? I mean, then the people will talk about their education, they will talk about their health care, they want to have salary, they want to, so who's going to take care of them? We knew that there will be a vacuum in Kurdish Syria. So when we received the first group of refugees, many young people fled from Syria, and we thought, what are they do? I mean, which kind of life they can have in Iraqi Kurdistan? Of course, at the end they must go back to Syria. But thinking about the future, so we thought it will be better to train them. We gave them training. It is not only military training. We gave them training, of course, to deal with the security in the future, security of their area, their village, their city. But the training included also administration, how you can manage the situation. Training included how you can lead a civil society. Training included history. Training included human rights, women's rights. So it was not only security, I call it security training, not military training. It was preparing those young people to lead their community when they will be back. And to be honest, when they went back, some of them, they went back, they became local leaders. That's important. But at the same time, we were thinking about security. Who's going to secure the areas when the Syrian security will not be there, Syrian army will not be there, local authority will not be there. Who's going to lead the community? So that was the question. And after analyzing the situation, we opened centers for giving them training. By the way, we have got, I think 2 weeks ago, we had about 13,000 refugees from Syria, and just before leaving, and that's a few days ago, I got a report. It reached about 20,000, and I think it will increase. So thousands and thousands of people are leaving Syria, and most of them who are coming nowadays, they are Kurds from Damascus and Aleppo. They are leaving these cities, and they are coming to Iraqi Kurdistan. So, of course, we want them to be useful, not just sitting there and to be a refugee. They must be prepared to go back, and to go back to lead, to serve. So that's the target of the training.